Merhaba arkadaşlar. Bugün data center ile ilgili bir videonun tercümesini yapacağız. Şimdiden izlediğiniz için çok teşekkür ederim.
Hi, this is Dave Cole. I'll be instructor
Merhaba,
for
ben
Power
Dave Cole.
Calculations module
Bu
as
derste
we
güç
continue
hesaplamaları
talking about
modülünde
power in the
eğitmeniz
data
olacağım.
center.
Veri
We're going to look at some
merkezindeki
power calculations.
güç konusunu konuşmaya
If you
devam
have any
ederken
questions
bazı
as
güç
we're going through this
hesaplamalarına
module,
bakacağız.
please be
Bu
sure to
modül
use
boyunca
the
herhangi bir
question and comment
sorunuz
box,
olursa lütfen
and
soru
happy
yorum
to
kutusunu
get right back
kullanın.
with you
Size
with
cevaplarla
answers to
geri
your
dönmekten
questions.
memnuniyet
So,
duyarım.
let's get started.
Hadi başlayalım.
Let's look at the topics that we're
Bu
going to cover in
modülde
this
ele
module.
alacağımız konulara
We're going to
bakalım.
look at
Güç
calculating
gereksinimlerinin
power
hesaplanmasına
requirements. So, in the data
bakacağız.
center,
Yeni bir
if
nevi
I'm building a new data
veri
center or if
merkezi
I'm adding
kuruyorsam
on
ya da
to a data
mevcut bir
center,
veri
how
merkezini
much power do I
işletiyorsam
need
içine
to be
koyacağım tüm
able to
ekipmanları
power all
çalıştırmak
the
için ne
equipment that
kadar
I'm
güce
going to put
ihtiyacım
into
var.
that data center?
Ayrıca veri merkezindeki
And
güç
we're going to look at
tüketimine de
power consumption in the data
bakacağız.
center.
Bu
Where's
güç
my power
nereye
going in the
gidiyor?
data center? I know I'm consuming it,
Güç
but what
tükettiğimi
is it
biliyorum ama bunu
that's
tüketen
using up the
nedir?
power? So let's look at
Güç
calculating the power
gereksinimlerini hesaplamak
requirements.
oldukça
It's
basit.
pretty straightforward,
Ancak ne kadar
but
yedeklilik
it is
kullanacağımız ve
complicated a little bit
gelecekteki
by
yükün
how much
tahmini
redundancy
gibi
am I going to
faktörler
have
bunu biraz
and
karmaşık hale
calculation of
getirir.
future load.
Güç
It's important that we're as
gereksinimlerini
accurate as
hesaplarken
possible when we're
mümkün
calculating power
olduğunca doğru
requirements.
olmanız
If
önemlidir.
we
Güç
underestimate power
ihtiyacının
requirements,
olduğundan düşük
we may have some
hesaplarsak
future power
geride güç
disruptions.
kesitleri
We never
yaşayabiliriz.
want to get caught without enough power
Veri
or cooling or
merkezinde
space. On the
yeterli
other hand, if we
güç,
overestimate power
soğutma
requirements,
veya alan
we're going to run
olmadan
into
yakalanmak
excessive
istemeyiz.
initial costs,
Diğer
and we're
taraftan
going to have
ihtiyacı fazla
higher
hesaplarsak
ongoing maintenance costs because
başlangıç
our energy
maliyetimiz çok düşük olur
efficiency
ve
is
enerji
not going to be
verimliliğimiz
very
düşük olacağı
good.
için
Right? So the
işletme
more accurate
maliyetimiz
we
artar.
can be, the better
Yani hesap
chance we're going to have of
ne
being
kadar doğru olursa
reliable
veri
and
merkezinin
available
daha
in our data
güvenilir,
center
daha
and also
kullanılabilir ve daha
operating
enerji verimli
energy
olma şansı
efficiently.
o kadar artar.
Where's our power going in the data center? As much as half
Veri
of it can
merkezindeki
go to
gücün nereye
cooling.
gittiğine bakalım.
Right, so we
Bunun
talked
yarısı
about a little bit
soğutmaya
about cooling, and we're going
gidebilir.
to
Biraz
talk quite a bit
soğutmadan
more about
bahsetmiştik
cooling
ve
and ways we
daha
can
da
be more
fazla
efficient.
konuşacağız.
But
Çünkü enerji
cooling
verimliliğini
is
arttırmanın
often
birçok
half of
yolu
the
var.
power in the data center.
Kritik
Then
yüzlerimiz,
we have our critical
sunucular,
loads, which can be
yönlendiriciler, depolama
a
sistemleri,
third or maybe
tüketimin
closer
üçte
to a
biri
half on
veya
that.
yarısı yakını
And we
oluşturuyor.
also have UPS inefficiency
UPS
when we're
verimsizliği ve
charging
batarya şarjı da
our
önemli bir
UPS
tüketimdir.
batteries.
Veri
That can be
merkezindeki
quite a
aydınlatmayı
bit of our
düşünmeyiz.
overall power
Bu
usage.
da bir
And then
tüketim
lighting in
unsurudur.
the data center.
Bu
We don't
alanlarda
think too much about lighting, but it's
olabildiğince
out
verimli
there.
olmak isteriz.
Right? So we would like to be as
Şimdi
efficient as
tipik
we
bir veri
can
merkezi
in
tasarım
all of these
firmasının güç
areas.
ihtiyacını nasıl hesapladığına
So
dair
let's
bir
go
örnek
through an
üzerinden
example
geçelim.
of what a typical data center design company would use to calculate what your power is going to be in the
Bazı
data center.
varsayımlarla
So we have to
başlayalım.
start with some assumptions. Let's assume we're going to have a 5,000 square foot data center.
Kare yaklaşık
Put
465
150
metrekare
racks
bir
in
veri
there.
merkezi olduğunu varsayalım.
And
İçinde
half of our
150
cooling is
adet
going to be direct
kabin var.
expansion,
Soğutmanın
and half
yarısı
of it's going to be
direkt
chilled water.
yerleşmeli. Diğer
We don't need to
yarısı
worry too much right
soğutmalı.
now if we're not sure what direct
Sistemiyle
expansion
yapılıyoruz.
cooling is or chilled water.
Direkt expansion
But it's
DX
important to know that there is a
ya da
difference
chilled water
in
sistemlerinin
cost for
soğutma
different types of
suyu
cooling
sistemlerinin bir bilmenize
strategies.
gerek yok.
So
Önemli
first
olan
thing we're
farklı
going to do,
soğutma
we're going to
sürecinin
start by
maliyet farkına
determining the
sahip
size
olması.
of our critical load.
İlk olarak kritik
What's in our critical load?
yükümüzün
Things like
büyüklüğünü
servers
belirlememiz
and routers,
gerekiyor.
storage
Kritik
devices,
yüke girenler
telecommunications
sunucular,
equipment, security,
yönlendiriciler,
fire
depolama
monitoring,
sistemleri,
right? All of these things are our
telekomünikasyon
critical
cihazları,
load. These are
güvenlik
all the
sistemleri,
things that we
yangın
want to
izleme
make
sistemleri. Bunların
sure
hepsi kritik
are going to
ekipmanlar
be
ve
up
her
all
zaman
the
çalışır
time.
durumda olmalarını
Right?
isteriz.
We're going to make a
Tüm
list of all of
cihazların
these
listesini
devices. We're
çıkarıyoruz.
going to look
Güç
at what their
değerlerine
power
bakıyoruz.
rating is.
Etiket
We can
değerlerine
look at nameplate
bakabiliriz ama
values, but
mümkünse
ideally
üretici
we're going to use
hesaplayıcılarını
the
kullanarak
manufacturer
gerçek güç
calculators
tüketimlerini
and
tahmin
figure out
ederiz.
how much power we think these
Güç
devices
değerlerine,
are
gerilim
really going
gereksinimlerine
to
tek
draw.
faz mı, 3 faz
We're
mı
going to look at the
gerektiğine
power
bakarız.
rating,
Çünkü amacımız
voltage
elimizdeki ekipmana
requirements.
uygun bir güç
Do we need
sistemi
single or three
tasarlamak.
phase, right? We need to know all of this stuff
Bunu
ahead of
küçük
time
bir
because
tablo
we're
haline
really
getirelim.
trying to design a power
Bunu
system to
kabin
match the
bazında yapmak
equipment that we
idealdir.
have.
Standart
So let's
bir kabin
put this together in a little grid.
yapımız
And
varsa
ideally, we
o
want to do
kabinin
this
güç
at a
tüketimini
rack by rack
detaylıca
basis.
hesaplayıp
Because if we've
kabinlerin
got kind of a
çoğunun benzer
standard
olduğunu
rack,
varsayarak
and we
hesaplamamız
can spend a little bit of
kolaylaşır.
time with that rack figuring out how
Örneğin
much
iki
power
sunucu ve
it's
iki
going to
depolama
draw.
birimi olduğunu varsayalım.
And if we then
Toplamda bu
say
kabinin
most of our
1,5
racks are going to be the
kilowatt
same, it
tükettiğini
now makes our
düşünelim.
calculations much
Bizim bir
easier.
kabin varsa
So
1,5
just for
kilowatt çarpı
purposes
150,
of example, let's
225
say we're going to have a
kilowatt
couple of
kritik yük
servers,
eder.
and there's our
Bu
power
kısım
ratings,
kolaydı ama iş
and
burada
a couple of
bitmiyor.
storage arrays. So we're going to say total at this
Altyapı,
rack, we think it's going to
soğutma,
be 1.5
aydınlatma gibi başka
kilowatts
yükler
of
de
power.
var.
Now, knowing that we're going to put
Şimdi
150 racks in
kritik
here,
yükten
I
sonra
can
büyüme
take
payını eklememiz
1.5
lazım. Veri
kilowatts of
merkezi
rack,
zamanla
multiply
büyüyecek.
that
Yükün
times
%20
150
artacağını
racks, and we're
varsayalım.
at
Bu da
225 25 kilowatts.
225
Well, that was pretty
voltun
easy.
%20'si olan 45
Except we're not
kilowatt
there yet,
eder.
right? Because this is
Yani
only
toplam
our
270
critical
kilowatt.
load. We've
Bazen
got to worry about our infrastructure
veri
and cooling and
merkezleri
lighting and
yılın
everything
belirli
else. But it's a
dönemlerinde
good start. We've
maksimum
gotten
güç
somewhere.
çeker.
So let's take our critical load, and now we
Amazon'un
need to figure
Şifren
out
günü
how
sonrası
big are we
yoğunluğu,
going to get?
muhasebe
Our data
firmalarının
center is
vergi dönem yoğunluğu
undoubtedly going to
gibi
grow over
bu
time.
dönemler için
So what do
%5'lik
we
bir
think our future load is
zirve
going
yük
to be?
çarpanı ekliyoruz.
Again, we don't want to
270
get caught
kW
without
çarpı
power, so let's try
1,05,
to give ourselves a
13,5
little bit of
kW
leeway here.
ekstra
So let's
yük
figure
eder.
about 20% growth. So that's another 45 kilowatts, right? 20% of our 225,
UPS
another
sistemi
45 kilowatts.
direkt
So
geçiyoruz.
now we're up to 270
UPS
kilowatts.
veriminin %88 olduğunu varsalalım.
Sometimes in the year,
100
we're going
kilowatt
to max out our
geliyorsa
data center.
88
Let's
kilowatt
imagine
çıkıyor
an
demektir.
Amazon.com the
Yani
day after Thanksgiving as we get into
%12
holiday
kayıp
season,
vardır.
people start buying gifts.
Ayrıca batarya
Maybe
tamamen
all their
veya
servers are
kısmen
really cranky.
boşaldıysa
Or maybe it's
giriş
an
gücünün
accounting
%20'si
firm,
bataryayı şarj
you know,
etmek için
on
kullanılabilir.
right before taxes are
Yani
due. Or
toplamda
whatever your business model happens to be.
%32
There's going to be some
ek
times
yük
when
var.
you're drawing
Bu
a
da
lot of additional
elektrik
power.
yükün
We're going to call
%32'si
that a
kadar.
peak power
Yani
multiplier. And
86,5
what we're going to do is give
kilowatt
ourselves
eder.
5% overhead for when everything's cranking at the same time. So now we take our 270 kilowatts, going to multiply that by 1.05, our peak power multiplier, and that's going to give us an extra 13.5 kilowatts of power that we need to account for. Okay? So now we got our critical load. Now we want to figure out what's our UPS load. This is where we start looking at things like UPS efficiency. Okay?
Burada
Let's
UPS'ten
assume our
bahsediyoruz.
UPS efficiency is
Ayrıca batarya zamanında
88%,
kısmı
which
boşaltsa giriş
means if I
gücünün
put
%20'si
100
batarya
kilowatts
şarj
in,
etmek için kullanılabilir.
88 kilowatts
Yani
come back
toplamda
out.
%32
Right?
ek yük
So I'm
vardır.
going to lose some of my
kritik
power inside the
yükün
UPS.
%32'si
I need to account
kadar,
for
yani
that because that's going to be a big number for us.
kilowatt eder.
I also need to remember that my UPS is going to try to take care of itself. So if its batteries aren't charged, as much as 20% of the power going into the UPS is going to be used to charge the battery. So I have 12% inefficiency, I have 20% battery charging that I need to worry about. That's 32%. 32% of my critical load is 86.5 kilowatts. I need to account for that when I'm looking at my total power. And in normal conditions, with a charged battery, my charging load is negligible. But if it's completely discharged or partially discharged, again, 20% of that could go to charging the battery. Now let's look at lighting. For
Aydınlatma
lighting
için
purposes, we're going to estimate about 2
feet
watts per
kare
square
başına
foot.
2 watt
We have
varsayımla
5,000 square
5000
foot,
feet
2
kare
watts per
çarpı
square
2
foot.
watt
That's
10 kilo
10 kilowatts for our
eder.
lighting load. Now we start adding
Tüm
all of
bunları
these up.
topladığımızda
So we started with our
225
critical load,
kilowatt
our server
artı
and IT
45 kilowatt
equipment,
artı 13,5
routers and
kilowatt
things like that.
artı
That was
86,5
225
kilowatt
kilowatts.
artı 10
We
kilowatt
put
eşittir
in
380
20% for our future
kilowatt
load. We added a peak
eder.
power adjustment. We added our UPS and battery overhead. We added lighting.
Şimdi
And now we're up to
soğutma ekliyoruz.
380
Soğutmanın
kilowatts. Right?
yarısı
So our load's
190
starting to
kilowatt.
grow. We
Soğutma
need to
suyla
account for
yapılacak.
all of that.
Cold water sistemleri
Now I
verimlidir.
need to add in
Yaklaşık
cooling.
%70
And I
çeker.
said for purposes of this example,
190
half of my
çarpı
cooling is going to be done with
0,7,
chilled water. So I'm
kilowatt.
going to cool 190 kilowatts with chilled
Diğer
water.
190 kilowatt ise
Chilled water is
büyük
pretty
sistemle
efficient.
yapılacak
So
ve
it's
aynı
going to take me
miktarda
about
güç çekecek.
0.7 of that is
190
how much
kilowatt.
power it's going to draw.
Toplam
So I take
soğutma yükü
0.7 times that
323
190 and I get
kilowatt.
133 kilowatts. Direct expansion, not quite as efficient. So I'm going to take, for me to cool 190 kilowatts, it's going to take me another 190 kilowatts to cool that. So now my cooling load, I add those two together and I get 323 kilowatts. Now our numbers are starting to get pretty big. Remember, we started way back when
Toplam
with
yük
just
şimdi
225 kilowatts for our
703
critical load.
kilowatt oldu.
But we've added future load, peak power draw, UPS and battery inefficiency, lighting, and now we're going to add in this big chunk for cooling.
Peki
And all of a
elektrik
sudden we're
şirketleri
looking
ne
at this
kadar
at
güç istemeyiz?
703 kilowatts. Right? These are pretty
NAC'ye
conservative
göre
numbers that
giriş
we
gücünün
use. But
%80'den
again, I don't
fazlasını
want to get
kullanmak
caught
istemeyiz.
without space, power, and
Bu
cooling.
yüzden
Those are
toplam
big
gücü
important things
125
for me.
arttırırız.
Now, how much do I
103
need to tell the utility company?
125
How much power do they need to give me?
879 kilowatt.
Well, I
Yani
can't tell them
elektrik şirketinin
703 kilowatts,
879
even though I think that's what my total power is.
talep
I
etmemiz
don't ever want to use more than
gerekir.
80% of what they give me. Right? I want to have that 20% overhead according to the National Electric Code. So I need to take my total power, my 703 kilowatts, multiply that by another 25%. So I need to tell the utility company, hey, Mr. Utility Company, I need 879 kilowatts. Right? So way back with our 225 kilowatts, all of a sudden, a number almost 3 or 4 times that is what I have to tell the utility company. Again, pretty conservative numbers, but this is the process that we would go through to calculate power in a data center. So here it is all kind of laid out for you. Now I want to look at how big a generator do I need?
Şimdi
I look at my
jeneratör
generator in
boyutuna
2
bakalım.
different stages.
Bunu iki parçaya
One for my
ayırıyoruz.
critical load
Kritik yük
and one for my
ve
cooling
soğutma
load.
yükü.
Because I may or may not
Kritik
want
yük
to run
için
my cooling off my
380
generator.
kilowatt
I have
çarpı
pretty
1
low
nokta 3
density
eşittir.
data center in this case. I
Jeneratör
may not
gücü.
need my cooling to be
Soğutma
run
için
off generator. So we
323
split these out.
kilowatt
Plus,
çarpı
the calculations are a little
1,55
bit different for
çarpanı
cooling
kullanılır.
versus my critical loads.
Çünkü motorlar,
So I take
pompalar
my
gibi
total
mekanik
power
ekipmanlar
load,
daha zor
380
yüklerdir.
kilowatts, I
Toplamda
multiply that by 1.3
yaklaşık
to get how big a generator,
995
how much generator I
kilowattlık
need
bir
to
jeneratör gerekir.
supply power for that much load. For cooling, I have to multiply that number by 1.55 because we got mechanical gear, we've got pumps and motors and things like that on cooling. It's harder for a generator to supply that power. So if I add those up, I get 995 kilowatts is the size of the generator that would be required if I want to support both my IT equipment plus my cooling. So again, these numbers add up very, very quickly. People forget about
Gördüğünüz
things
gibi
like
rakamlar çok hızlı büyüyor.
UPS charging, and they forget about
UPS
things like
şarjı,
lighting
aydınlatma,
and future
gelecekteki
loads and
yükler
things
bunların
like that.
hepsi
But these
unutulmaya
numbers
çok
can
müsait.
grow very, very quickly. Where's my power going in the data
Veri
center?
merkezindeki gücün nereye
Ideally,
gittiğine
all
tekrar
of my power to the
bakalım.
data center would go to my IT load. Right?
Keşke tüm enerji
That's
IT
the
yüküne
important
gitse
stuff.
ama
My
gitmiyor.
servers, my storage, my
Soğutma,
telecommunications
güvenlik,
equipment.
aydınlatma ve diğer
Unfortunately, all
altyapı
the power
yükleri
going into the
önemli bir
data
kısmı
center
götürüyor.
doesn't go to my IT load. Some of
Ayrıca
it gets sidetracked. Some of
kablolarda,
it's going to go to my
UPS'te,
support
cable'larda
infrastructure,
kayıplar
like
oluyor.
cooling and lights and security
Gerçek
and things like
IT
that.
yüküne
Right?
giden güç
And part of it's going to go
toplamın
to
1/3
my UPS, my
veya
PDU cabling and
yarısı kadar
switches,
olabilir.
and I'm going to have power losses. Anytime I run power over a cable, I lose some of that power. Every time I run power through a UPS, I lose some of that power. Every time I go through a PDU transformer, I lose some of that power. So I have these losses in the power system. The remaining power now is what goes to my IT load, right? So certainly not all the power.
Bunun için
Maybe only half the power.
PUA
Maybe only a third of my power
adlı
is
bir
now going to
verimlilik
my IT
metriği
load.
var.
So we have a
PUA
metric, an energy
eşittir toplam
efficiency
veri
metric in
merkezi
the
gücü
data center called
bölü IT
PUE,
yükü.
power usage effectiveness.
Bu
And
değer
what this
ne kadar
value is
düşükse o
the
kadar iyi.
total power to my
Teorik en
data
iyi değer
center.
1'dir.
Right?
Tipik
Everything
veri
going to my data
merkezlerinde
center
bu
divided
yaklaşık
by how much
2'dir.
of that power actually
Yani
gets to the IT
gücün
load.
yarısı IT'ye gider.
We would like
Yarısı
that number to
kayıplara
be
ve destek
1. That's as
ekipmanlarına
low as it
gider.
could get. That would mean that every bit of power going to the data center is going to my IT load. Right? Typical data center is about 2.
Güç tüketimin alt
That means
kalemlere
about half the power going to the data center actually makes it to my IT load. Because of the support infrastructure and these losses in the power system. So let's look at this power
güç
consumption in
tüketimini
data
alt
center.
kalemlere
We looked at
ayırdığımızda
this
IT ekipmanları
before, but now we're
%30
going to break it into a
ve
little bit
klima
more detail.
%9.
So we got power going to IT equipment,
Nemlendirme,
maybe 30%.
chiller,
Maybe my computer room
UPS,
air conditioner, my
PDU,
crack unit, maybe
aydınlatma
that's taking
gibi kalemler
9%. My humidifier may
paylarını
take
alır.
some, my chiller may take some, my UPS, my PDU, my lighting, right? So a lot of different
Enerji
entities want
verimliliğini
to grab some of my power.
arttırmak
And the
istiyorsak
reason I
önce
break this
büyük
up, and your
tüketenlere
mileage is certainly going to vary in
odaklanmamız
your data center,
gerekir.
but the reason I bring this up is if I want to improve my energy efficiency in the data center, I'm probably not going to start with
Genel olarak veri
lighting
merkezindeki
because
gücün
that's
nereye
only
gittiğini,
1% of my total
nasıl
load.
hesaplandığını,
I want to look at the
bu
big areas. I
hesaplamaların
want to look
neden bu
at
kadar
IT equipment
önemli olduğunu
and my crack unit and my chiller and my UPS because those are taking bigger chunks of my power consumption in the data center. So it's kind of a recap. We talked about where was the power
genel olarak
going in the
veri
data
merkezindeki
center,
gücün nereye
and
gittiğini,
certainly a
nasıl
lot of that
hesaplanır, bu
power is going to be
hesaplamaların
wasted.
neden
We're
bu
going to
kadar
talk
önemli
in
olduğunu
future
anlattık.
modules
Sorularınız
about
olursa memnuniyetle
some
cevaplarım.
other
Bir
modules
sonraki
about
modülde
how we can reduce some of that
görüşmek
wasted
üzere.
power
Teşekkür
in the
ederim.
data center. We talked about how we can calculate in a new data center or